On a family trip to a luxury resort, my daughter-in-law humiliated me in the lobby. We canceled the old lady's room. She deserves to sleep in the garbage dump. Everyone laughed at me. I simply walked to the front desk and presented a gold card. When the manager recognized me, everyone turned pale. So glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment from which city you're watching me so I can see how far my story has traveled. I'm 61 years old and never imagined that the worst moment of my life would happen in front of strangers in the lobby of a luxury resort. We've been driving for almost 4 hours. My son, Daniel, was behind the wheel. His wife, Tiffany, was in the passenger seat, and I was in the back with my 2 grandchildren. I had been waiting for this trip for months. Months. Ever since Daniel casually mentioned in a phone call that they were going to the Mountain Crest Resort for spring break, something in my chest lit up with a hope that I should have immediately stifled. Tiffany said there was room for me. Well, what she actually said was, I guess your mother can come if she really wants to. In that tone I knew so well, the one that turned every invitation into a concession, every gesture into a favor I didn't deserve. But I accepted. Of course I accepted. During the drive, Tiffany complained about the traffic, the heat, and the radio station Daniel had chosen. When one of the kids asked if we could stop for a bathroom break, she sighed as if they had asked her to climb a mountain. Just 30 more minutes, she said irritably. Daniel said nothing. He never said anything. I looked out the window, trying to feel excited, trying to convince myself that this time would be different, that maybe, just maybe, we could be a real family for a few days. The Mountain Crest Resort appeared before us like something out of a magazine. White stone walls, impeccable gardens, a huge fountain at the main entrance. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, Mercedes, BMWs, the occasional Tesla. Daniel parked our sedan among them, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt like I was part of something special. We entered the lobby, and the air conditioning hit me like a blessing after the heat of the car. The place was even more stunning inside. Soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble floors so polished you could see your reflection. Elegant families were lining up at the front desk, employees moved with quiet efficiency, and the soft murmur of conversations mixed with instrumental background music. I truly wonder if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace, or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. I stayed behind while Daniel and Tiffany approached the counter. The children ran towards a decorative fountain near the waiting area. I held my small rolling suitcase, suddenly feeling out of place in my simple floral dress and comfortable shoes. Tiffany spoke with the receptionist, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a perfect bun. I watched as she checked something on the computer, as Tiffany nodded as Daniel signed papers. Everything seemed fine, normal, routine. Then Tiffany turned to me. There was something in her expression, a kind of glint in her eyes that I recognized immediately. It was the same look she had when she was about to make one of her innocent comments, the ones that always sounded like jokes but left bruises that lasted for days. She approached me with deliberate steps, her heels clicking against the marble. The lobby was full of people, families waiting their turn, employees carrying luggage, guests comfortably seated on the leather couches, and Tiffany raised her voice. She didn't scream, but she spoke loudly enough for everyone to turn around. We canceled your room at Rose. I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. I waited for Daniel to say something, to correct her, to explain there was a mistake, but he just stared at the floor with his hands in his pockets. Tiffany continued, and her voice grew louder, clearer. We're not going to waste money on a room for you. You can sleep in the garbage dump. It's what you deserve after everything. Laughter. I heard laughter. Not from everyone, but from some. An older man in a cashmere sweater let out a choked chuckle. A younger woman whispered something to her partner, and they both smiled. Even the receptionist lowered her gaze, uncomfortable, as if witnessing this were part of her job. My son, my only son, the child I raised, the child I fed, the child I held when he had nightmares, laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, it was a nervous, soft chuckle, but I heard it, and that was worse than any roar of laughter. The children didn't understand what was happening. The older one, 9 years old, looked at me confused. Grandma, is she going to sleep with us? He asked. Tiffany pulled his arm. Be quiet, sweetie. The adults are talking. I felt hot, first in my chest, then rising up my neck to my cheeks. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was something deeper, a mix of humiliation and betrayal, pain, so sharp that it was difficult to breathe. The chandelier light seemed too bright. The murmur of conversations turned into a distant buzz. My legs were shaken. For a second, I considered turning around and leaving, just walking out, calling a cab, going back to the bus station, disappearing from their lives as they clearly wanted. But something inside me shifted in that instant. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was clarity too. For years, I had tolerated Tiffany's comments, the small cruelties, the convenient forgetfulness when it came to inviting me to family events, the Christmases where there wasn't room in the car to pick me up, the kids' birthdays where the invitation arrived a day after the party. And my son, my Daniel, never said anything, never defended me, always found an excuse, a justification, a way to minimize what his wife did. And I allowed it because they were my family, because I didn't want to cause trouble, because I was afraid of losing them completely. But in that moment, standing in the middle of that luxurious lobby, with strangers looking at me with pity or amusement, I realized something. I'd already lost them a long time ago. I inhaled deeply. My hand stopped shaking. I adjusted the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the reception desk. I didn't look at Tiffany. I didn't look at Daniel. I walked with my back straight, with firm steps, even though inside I felt like I was falling apart. The receptionist looked at me with a cautious expression. Ma'am, can I help you? I took a card out of my purse. It wasn't a common credit card. It was gold-aced, heavy, with a particular shine under the lobby lights. I placed it on the marble counter without saying a word. The receptionist took it. Her eyes went wide. She looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card. Her fingers trembled slightly as she slid it through the reader. Mrs. Whitmore, she whispered. Her face went pale. We didn't know you'd be here. My apologies. We didn't have a record of your arrival. Behind me, the silence was absolute. I could feel the stares fixed on my back. The receptionist quickly typed on her computer with nervous movements. Just a moment, please. I'm calling the general manager right away. And then he arrived. An impeccably dressed man with perfectly combed gray hair walked quickly from a side office. His expression went from professional to nearly irreverent when his eyes landed on me. Mrs. Whitmore, his voice resonated in the lobby. He approached with hurried steps. We had no idea you would honor us with your presence. Your name is on the resort's ownership list, but the world seemed to stop. Owners, I heard a choked gasp behind me. I knew who it was, the manager. He continued speaking, but I could barely focus on his words. Something about the presidential suite, about special arrangements, about how the staff would be at my disposal. My heart pounded, not from nerves, but from a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I turned around slowly. Daniel was pale, completely pale. His mouth opened and closed as if he wanted to speak, but the words were stuck in his throat. Tiffany, on the other hand, had a face frozen in an expression of pure shock. Her green eyes, usually so calculating, now reflected something I had never seen in her. Fear. And the children were pulling on their father's sleeve, asking questions he couldn't answer. The people who a moment before had been laughing were now watching us with an uncomfortable curiosity. Some murmured among themselves. Others simply stared, waiting to see what would happen next. Mrs. Whitmore, the manager gently touched my arm. Would you like us to take your luggage to your suite immediately? We have champagne, and the chef can prepare whatever you wish for dinner. I nodded silently. I still didn't trust my voice. Perfect. And your companions? He looked at Daniel and Tiffany with a neutral, professional expression, but there was something in his eyes, recognition. He had witnessed the entire scene. They have their own reservation, I said. Finally, my voice came out firmer than I expected. They will not be traveling with me. The manager nodded. Of course, if you need anything at all, dial 0 from your room. He signaled a young bellhop. Escort Mrs. Whitmore to the presidential suite. As the bellhop took my suitcase, Daniel took a step forward. Mom, we need to talk. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a 37-year-old man, not the child he had been. I saw the lines around his eyes, the start of gray hair at his temples, the slightly hunched posture of someone carrying an invisible weight. But more than anything, I saw a stranger, someone who looked like my son, but had ceased to be him a long time ago. Not now, Daniel. But, Mom, I don't understand why you never told us. Later, I said, and I followed the bellhop to the elevators. The presidential suite was on the 15th floor. The bellhop made polite conversation during the ride, mentioning the amenities, the restaurant hours, the spa's location. I nodded without really listening. My mind was somewhere else at another time. When the suite door closed behind me, I could finally breathe. The room was spectacular, floor-to-ceiling windows with mountain views, elegant furniture, a full kitchen, even a grand piano in the corner. There were fresh flowers in crystal vases, a bottle of champagne on ice, as the manager had promised, and gourmet chocolates on the coffee table. I sank onto the blue velvet sofa and closed my eyes. The truth was more complicated than anyone imagined. 15 years ago, when my husband Richard died, he left me more than anyone knew. Richard had been a quiet, hard-working man, the kind of person who went unnoticed in a crowd. We had lived modestly, never showing off, never drawing attention. But Richard had been smart with investments, very smart. When he died, I discovered we had almost managed 10 million in various assets, properties, stocks, bonds, and this resort, Mountain Crest, had been one of his last investments. He had bought up 30% stakes as when the place was under construction, betting it would become a successful luxury destination. He was right. Tell me whether you have parents, grandparents, or older family members who deserve more respect than they currently receive from their families. Alternatively, tell me if you yourself are going through a situation in which you're not appreciated as much as you truly deserve. After his death, I had to make decisions. Daniel was 22 then, newly graduated from college, full of ideas about how to help me manage the finances. He and Tiffany had only been dating for 6 months, but she was there in every conversation, in every family meeting, offering suggestions. I remember one particular afternoon, we were sitting at the kitchen table in my old house, reviewing documents. Daniel had that serious look he put on when he wanted to seem grown up. Mom, I think you should let me handle this. It's complicated. I don't want you to stress yourself or make mistakes. Mistakes. As if I were incapable, as if 40 years of marriage and running a household hadn't taught me anything about money. Tiffany was next to him, nodding with a worried expression. It's a lot to process, Rose. Daniel just wants to take care of you. Maybe it would be better if he took charge of the accounts, the investments. You could just relax, enjoy your pension. Pension. As if I were an invalid elderly woman. But I nodded. I let them believe they would. I showed them some accounts, some documents, just enough to satisfy them, and kept the rest for myself, the biggest investments, the properties, the business stakes, including the resort. Why did I do it? At first, I didn't know. There was something in the way they talked to me, in the way they assumed my incompetence, that made me want to protect what Richard and I had built. Then, as the months and then the years passed, it became something else. It became a test. I wanted to see who they really were when they thought I had nothing to offer them, except my presence. I wanted to know if they loved me as a mother or if they just tolerated me as an obligation. The answer came slowly, painfully. Daniel and Tiffany got married a year after Richard's death. They didn't ask me for help with the wedding. Tiffany said her parents would handle everything. I assumed it was because they wanted to control the details. Years later, a cousin casually mentioned that Tiffany had said it wasn't worth asking Rose for money because she barely had enough to survive on her pension. My pension, which they assumed was all I had. When the children were born, I tried to be present. I offered to babysit, to help, to be the grandmother I wanted to be, but there were always excuses. Tiffany was busy with her routine. The children had too many activities. It wasn't a good time for visits. On Christmas, they would invite me, but always with that tone. I guess you can come if you don't have other plans. As if it were a favor. As if my presence were a burden they endured out of obligation. And the birthdays, God, the birthdays. Daniel never forgot Tiffany's. Flowers, elegant dinners, expensive gifts. My 60th birthday last year passed without a single call. When I finally called 3 days later, Daniel said, "I'm sorry, Mom. Work completely slipped my mind." Tiffany had had her surprise party 2 weeks earlier. 40 guests, live music, a three-tier cake. I swallowed the pain again and again, but somewhere inside me, a part had registered every slight, every oversight, every time they chose to exclude me. And that part had grown, solidifying into something cold and clear. They were not my family, they were my day's failed exam. The sweet phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. I ignored it. It rang 3 more times before stopping. Then my cell phone started vibrating. Daniel. I ignored the call, then another and another. Finally, a text message arrived. "Mom, please, we need to talk. We're in the lobby restaurant. We'll wait for you." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I slowly typed a reply. "I'll see you at the restaurant at 7, just you and Tiffany. The children should stay with the hotel sitter." Dinner was in 2 hours. I took a long shower, letting the hot water loosen the tension in my shoulders. I put on a dress I had bought months ago but had never worn. It was elegant, a deep navy blue, with a cut that fit me better than I remembered. I styled my hair, put on a little makeup. When I looked in the mirror, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. I saw a woman who was not apologetic for existing. I went down to the restaurant at exactly 7. The place was beautiful, with dim lighting, candles on every table, the gentle clinking of glasses and cutlery. I saw Daniel and Tiffany at a corner table. He looked agitated, swirling his wineglass in nervous circles. She had that expression I knew well. Forced control, tight lips, hands on the table, fingers laced too tightly. I sat across from them without saying a word. A waiter appeared immediately, filling my water glass, offering the menu. I ordered without looking at it, keeping my eyes on my son. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Daniel broke it. "Mom, why did you never tell us?" I took a sip of water before answering. "Tell you what exactly? That I own this place? That I have money? All this time we thought you were barely surviving on Dad's pension." "I never said that," I replied calmly. "You assumed it." Tiffany leaned forward, her voice controlled but tense. "You made us look foolish out there in front of all those people." I looked at her directly. For the first time in 15 years, I looked at her without flinching. "Nurse," I said softly, "you made yourselves look exactly like what you are." Tiffany recoiled as if I had slapped her. Daniel opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The waiter arrived with our appetizers, placing them carefully before quietly retreating. No one touched their plate. "I don't understand you," Daniel finally said, his voice trembling. "If you had money, if you had all this, why did you let us think you were poor?" I finished the sentence for him. That I was a burden, that I needed your pity. I took my fork, cutting a piece of salmon with precise movement, because I wanted to see something. "See what?" Tiffany practically spat the words. I chewed slowly, savoring the food they hadn't even tasted. "I wanted to see if you loved me without expecting anything in return. I wanted to know if I was worth anything to you beyond what I could give you." Daniel shook his head, confused. "Mom, we've always loved you, always." The words would have moved me years ago. Now they just sounded hollow. "Oh, yes," I said softly. "Like when you left me out of the Christmas dinner 3 years ago because there wasn't room in the car?" I checked later. "You rented a minivan for 7 people. There were 5 of you." Daniel blinked. There was a misunderstanding with the rental. Or like my 60th birthday last year," I continued. My voice was still calm, almost conversational. "Not a single call, not a single message, but 2 weeks before you spent 5,000 on Tiffany's surprise party. I called you afterward," Daniel protested weakly. "I apologized. 3 days later, after I called first," I took a sip of wine, "and your apology was that you were busy with work." Tiffany leaned forward, her eyes bright with barely contained anger. "This is ridiculous. You're behaving like a resentful child, keeping score of every little mistake." "Little mistake?" I repeated. I placed the fork on the plate. It did that with a soft click. Tiffany, in 15 years, you have invited me to your house exactly 11 times, I counted. And of those 11, 6 were because you needed me to watch the children while you went out. That's not fair, Daniel said. We lead busy lives, Mom. We have responsibilities. I know, I nodded. That's why I never complained. That's why I always said yes when you needed something. I watched the children when they had the flu, and you had that important conference. Remember, Daniel? I was awake 3 nights in a row. When you returned, you didn't even ask how they had been. You just said thank you and went to sleep. Silence fell back over the table. I could see Daniel processing, remembering, his face twisted with each memory. Or when your washing machine broke, I continued looking at Tiffany. I offered you money to fix it. You said you didn't need anyone's charity. But 2 weeks later, you asked Daniel to buy you a new one. He took the money from his emergency fund. 3,000 and Tiffany pursed her lips. We didn't know you could. Exactly, I interrupted. You didn't know because you never asked. You assumed I was poor, that I was a burden, that my only function was to be available when you needed me and to disappear when you didn't. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since he was a boy when he was overwhelmed. Mom, if you had told us... What? My voice rose for the first time. Not much, but enough for nearby tables to turn. I lowered my tone. If I had told you I had money, you would have treated me differently. Does that make this better or worse? Daniel didn't answer. I took another sip of wine, feeling its warmth go down my throat. When your father died, you two came home every week, remember? You helped me with the paperwork, the bank calls, everything. I paused, but as soon as you thought everything was settled, as soon as you assumed I only had a basic pension and nothing else to offer, the visits spaced out, first every 2 weeks, then once a month, then only on holidays, and then not even that. We had the kids, Tiffany protested. We had a life to build. I know, I nodded. And I never asked to be the center of your life. I only asked not to be completely forgotten. Daniel took a deep breath, his eyes glistening. Mom, I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't look at him directly. Not once did you notice that your wife talked about me as if I were a burden. Not once did you wonder why your mother spent every holiday alone. He remained silent. I looked at Tiffany. Last Christmas, your sister posted photos of your family dinner on Facebook. I saw all of you, 20 people around that enormous table. Daniel's family, your family, friends. I was a 15-minute drive away. I ate a turkey sandwich in front of the TVs. You told us you had other plans, Tiffany said defensively. I lied because I knew the invitation was out of obligation, not because you genuinely wanted me there. I placed my napkin on the table. And the truth, Tiffany, is that I preferred being alone to enduring another dinner where you would treat me like furniture. That's unfair, she hissed. I've always been kind to you. Kind. I let out a humorless laugh. Tiffany, you told your mother I was difficult to please. I heard you. I was in the bathroom at your house during Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago. You were in the kitchen. You said I was critical, demanding, that I always found something to complain about. Tiffany paled slightly. I've never complained. Not about the food, not about how you raise your children, not about anything. But you needed to paint me as the villain to justify how you treated me. I stood up from the table. So no, I wasn't the one who made you look foolish this afternoon. You did that all by yourselves. Wait, Daniel stood up too. You can't just leave. We have to resolve this. There's nothing to resolve, Daniel. You showed me who you are for 15 years, and I finally believed you. So what? Tiffany stood up, her voice shrill. Are you going to punish us? To disinherit us? Was all this just to humiliate us? I looked at her with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. No, Tiffany, I'm not going to punish you. I don't need to. You're already living with the consequences of your choices. I'm just refusing to keep living with them. Mom, please. Daniel caught up to me, taking my arm. His touch was soft, almost pleading. Give me a chance to fix this. Just tell me what to do. I looked at him. I saw tears in his eyes. I saw genuine regret on his face. But I also saw something else. I saw a 37-year-old man who had just realized his mother had money and that he had wasted years of potential benefit. I don't want you to fix anything, I said softly, releasing my arm. I just want you to leave me alone. I returned to my suite with a heavy heart but a clear mind. The room phone began to ring 20 minutes later. I unplugged it. My cell phone vibrated constantly with messages. I silenced them all. I poured myself a glass of wine from the minibar and stepped out onto the balcony. The nighttime view of the mountains was stunning. Flickering lights of distant houses, stars shining in a clear sky, the cool air filling my lungs. For the first time in 15 years, I felt light. The next morning, I went down to the restaurant early. I ordered breakfast. I enjoyed fresh coffee and toast with homemade jam. I read the newspaper an employee courteously brought me. It was almost normal, almost peaceful until Daniel appeared. He looked terrible, swollen eyes, wrinkled clothes, as if he hadn't slept. He sat across from me without asking permission. "I didn't sleep all night," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I've been thinking, remembering. And you're right, Mom, about everything." I kept eating my breakfast. "Tiffany and I fought hard. She says you're exaggerating, that you're being manipulative, but He ran his hands over his face. I started recalling things I had ignored, things I let slide because it was easier than confronting Tiffany. I took a sip of coffee and I realized I've been a yapped son." His voice broke. "The worst son." "Yes," I said simply. "You have been." He seemed surprised by my direct honesty. "But Daniel," I continued, setting down my cup, "I didn't come here looking for an apology. I didn't come looking for you to finally see what you've done. I came because Tiffany invited me, and foolishly, I thought maybe things would be different." "They can be," he said quickly. "We can change. I can change." "Why?" I asked. "Because you know now that I have money? Because you realize there might be an inheritance to lose?" "No," he protested, but there was doubt in his eyes. "Because you're my mother." "I've always been your mother, Daniel. That didn't change yesterday. What changed was your perception of what I can offer you." He remained silent, unable to deny it. I stood up from the table, leaving enough money to cover the bill, although I knew I didn't need to. "I'm going home tomorrow. You can stay for the rest of the week. It's paid for. Consider it my last gift as a mother." "Last?" His voice trembled. "Mom, you can't be serious." "Completely serious." I put my purse over my shoulder. "I don't want your money back or your empty apologies. I just want peace. And that peace doesn't include continuing to be treated like a second-class citizen in my own family." I left him sitting there with his head in his hands, but I knew it wasn't over. It never is that simple with family. I spent the rest of the morning at the resort spa. I had a massage, a facial. I sat in the sauna, letting the heat draw out all the tensions accumulated over the years. The staff treated me with a deference that would have made me uncomfortable before, but now I simply accepted it. I was an owner of this place. I had invested my money wisely when others assumed I knew nothing more than cooking and cleaning. I was in the relaxation room, wrapped in a soft robe and drinking herbal tea, when one of the spa employees approached with an uncomfortable expression. "Mrs. Whitmore, excuse the interruption. There's a very insistent lady at the reception asking for you. She says she's family." I sighed. "Tell her I'm not available." The employee nodded and withdrew. I closed my eyes, trying to reclaim some of the peace I had felt moments before. But 5 minutes later, my cell phone began to ring. It was a local number I didn't recognize. I answered out of sheer curiosity. "Hello, Rose." It was Tiffany, of course. "I'm in the lobby. We need to talk. Now. I'm busy." "I don't care what you're busy with. Come down immediately or I'll come up myself." Something in her tone, that air of authority she had always used with me, ignited something inside me. "If you try to come up to my suite, I'll call security." Silence on the other end, then in a more controlled but still tense voice. "Ted says, please, just 5 minutes." I considered hanging up, but there was something different in her voice. It wasn't the demanding, confident Tiffany I knew. There was a nuance of desperation. "Lounge area next to the lobby, 5 minutes, no more." I dressed unhurriedly, taking my time. If Tiffany was going to demand my presence, she could wait. I went down 15 minutes later. I found her sitting rigidly on one of the leather sofas, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she saw me, she stood up immediately. She wasn't wearing her usual perfect makeup. Her eyes were red. Her hair was not as impeccably styled. She looked human, vulnerable. Then I sat across from her without saying a word. "You're Destroying at my marriage, she said abruptly. I raised an eyebrow. I'm not doing anything. Your marriage is destroying itself. Daniel didn't sleep last night. He was awake, looking through old photos, reading old messages. He's realized. She bit her lip. He's realized things. That you manipulated him to keep me away. That you built a narrative where I was the problematic mother-in-law to justify your cruelty. I kept my voice neutral. Yes, I imagine realizing that must be uncomfortable. It wasn't like that, she protested, but without conviction. I just wanted us to be our own family without interference. Interference. I repeated the word slowly. Tiffany, in 15 years, I've seen you perhaps 30 times. If that's interference, I don't know what absence is. She wrung her hands. You're right. I know. I've been horrible to you, but you have to understand. My own mother was controlling, always getting into my life, my marriage. When Daniel and I got married, I swore I wouldn't let that happen. So I assumed you would be the same. Yes. She said it so softly I barely heard her. And every time you tried to get closer, I saw it as invasion, as a control. So I pushed you away, and Daniel, she paused. Daniel let me because he trusted me, because I made him believe I was doing it for, well, us. It was the most honest confession I had heard from her, but it came too late, much too late. And now what, Tiffany? Do you come to apologize because Daniel finally opened his eyes? Or because you realize there's money you could have enjoyed all these years? Her face twitched. It's not about the money, no. I leaned forward. Because just yesterday you said you had canceled my room. You sent me to the garbage dump. You did that for family love? Tears began to roll down her cheeks. I was angry. God, I don't know. I was upset because Daniel insisted on you coming, because once again we had to endure his mother, and in my head you were this figure who represented everything I didn't want to be, an intrusive, needy, demanding mother-in-law. And you never were any of those things. I know, she sobbed openly now. I know, and Daniel is throwing it in my face. He's reviewing every moment, every excuse I gave not to invite you. Last night he yelled at me. He told me I'm cruel, that I'm manipulative, that I've become my mother, and she covered her face with her hands. And he's right. Seeing Tiffany break down like this should have given me satisfaction. I should have felt vindication, but I only felt weariness. Tiffany, I didn't come here to destroy your marriage. I came because foolishly I still had hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could be family. But what you did yesterday in front of all those people only confirmed what I already knew. I am not welcome in your life, and I probably never was. I can change, Feng, she said desperately. I can be better. Just give me a chance. A chance for what? To pretend you appreciate me? To invite me to awkward dinners where we all pretend the last 15 years didn't happen? I shook my head. No, Tiffany, I don't want that. Then what do you want? Her voice was pleading. Tell me what to do and I'll do it. I want you to leave me alone. The words came out colder than I intended. I want you and Daniel to live your life, raise your children, and forget about me, because that's what you've been doing anyway. Only now we'll make it official. She stood up abruptly. You can't be serious. The children need you. Daniel needs you. The children don't know me, and Daniel... I paused. Daniel chose a long time ago. He chose his comfort over my well-being. He chose your version of reality over the truth. And now that the truth has come to light, I can't just pretend that doesn't matter. Tiffany wiped the tears with the back of her hand. You're his mother. Mothers are supposed to forgive. Supposed to. I looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and sadness. Tiffany, I've spent 15 years forgiving every oversight, every slight, every small humiliation. Forgiveness is not infinite, and mine ran out yesterday when you told me I deserved to sleep in a garbage dump. She stood there trembling, then in a low voice she asked, What are we going to tell the children? That's not my problem. I stood up. But if you want my advice, tell them the truth. Tell them their grandmother tried to be a part of their lives, but their mother wouldn't let her. And when they finally had a chance to be a real family, they chose to humiliate her publicly. That will make them hate me. Possibly, but it's better they hate the truth than love a lie. I started to walk away, but her voice stopped me. Rose, I turned halfway. You're right about everything, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I treated you that way. I'm sorry I wasted 15 years, and I'm sorry it's too late to fix it. Her voice broke again. But for what it's worth, I truly regret it. I looked at her for a long moment. I saw genuine repentance in her eyes. I saw a woman facing the consequences of years of cruelty. And for a second, just a second, I considered giving in. But then I remembered. I remembered every lonely Christmas, every forgotten birthday, every poisonous comment disguised as a joke. And I remembered yesterday standing in that lobby, feeling the humiliation burn my skin while my own family laughed. I know, I said finally, but being sorry doesn't undo the damage, and it certainly doesn't rebuild 15 years of broken trust. I left her there, crying on that leather sofa, and went up to my suite. That afternoon, I called the resort's general manager. Robert, I need to make some changes to my stake here. We met in his office, an elegant room overlooking the gardens. I explained my situation, or at least enough for him to understand. He was discreet, professional, but I saw understanding in his eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, are you sure? This has been a very successful investment for you. I know, but I need a change. I need to separate myself from anything that ties me to this area, to this life. I signed the papers he had prepared. I'd sell my stake, find another investor, use the money to set up a trust fund for my grandchildren, accessible only when they turn 25, but neither Daniel nor Tiffany will have access to it. Robert nodded, taking notes. And your suite, your privileges, will end tomorrow when you leave. I won't be coming back here. I understand. He paused. If I may say so, ma'am, I'm sorry for what happened in the lobby. The staff is dismayed by how you were treated. It's not your fault or the staff's. Sometimes family is the most dangerous place to be. I stood up. I returned to my suite and began packing. I didn't have much. I had never been one to accumulate things. As I folded my clothes, my cell phone rang. It was Daniel. I hesitated, but finally answered. Yes, Mom. His voice sounded broken. Tiffany told me what you talked about. Please, don't do this. Don't abandon us. I'm not abandoning you, Daniel. You abandoned me years ago. I'm just officially acknowledging what was already real. That's not fair. I was an idiot. I admit it. But I'm your son, your only son. I know. I closed my suitcase. And you will always be my son. But that doesn't mean I have to put up with how I'm treated. Love isn't enough when it comes wrapped in contempt. Give me a chance to show you I can change, please. I sat on the bed, holding the phone to my ear. Daniel, do you know how many times in these 15 years I waited for you to change? I waited for you to wake up one day and see what Tiffany was doing to me. I waited for you to defend your mother, to choose to stand up for me. Even if it was uncomfortable, I paused. But you never did, not once. I was blind. She manipulated me. No, Daniel, don't blame only her. You saw what you wanted to see. You heard what you wanted to hear because it was easier to believe I was the problem than to face that your wife was cruel. Silence on the other end, then in a voice barely audible, what do I do now? Live your life. Be better with your children than you were with me. And someday when you're ready to be honest with yourself about all of this, maybe we can talk. When will that be? I don't know. Maybe never. I took a deep breath. But for now, I need to distance. I need to heal, and I can't do that if I keep waiting for you to change. I hung up before he could respond. That night, standing on the balcony of my suite for the last time, I looked at the mountains under the moonlight. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I had waited so long to be seen, to be valued, and when they finally did, it was only because they discovered I had something they wanted. Tomorrow, I would leave. I would leave this resort, this family, this life that was never truly mine. And for the first time in 15 years, the idea of being alone didn't scare me. It filled me with a peace I didn't know was possible. The morning of my departure dawned gray, with low clouds covering the mountains. There was something appropriate about it, as if the weather reflected the mood of these last few days. I finished packing early, leaving the suite spotless as if I had never been there. I was in the lobby checking out when I saw him. Daniel was sitting on one of the sofas near the entrance, looking as if he had slept there. His clothes were the same as the day before, wrinkled and unkempt. He had deep circles under his eyes and disheveled hair. When our eyes met, he stood up immediately. Mom, wait! The manager, Robert, who was processing my departure, looked at me with a questioning expression. I nodded slightly. He understood and discreetly withdrew. Daniel approached, but he kept a certain distance, as if he feared I might disappear if he got too close. I know you said you needed space, I know, but I can't let you leave like this. I can't, Daniel. No, please, let me talk. He ran his hands over his face. I spent the whole night awake, not just thinking, but remembrance. Really remembering. And you're right, Mom, about absolutely everything. A group of guests walked past us, heading to the restaurant. Daniel lowered his voice, although the desperation in it was still evident. I remember that Christmas when Tiffany said there was no room in the car. I didn't question anything. I just accepted her word because it was easier than confronting her. His eyes filled with tears. And your birthday, God, your 60th birthday. Tiffany reminded me that morning. She said, "It's your mother's birthday today." And I said, "I'll call her later." But I didn't. I went to work. I got tangled up in meetings, and when I came home, Tiffany was planning her surprise party, and I simply forgot. I know, Daniel. No, you don't know everything. His voice broke. Last night, after you talked to Tiffany, she told me everything. She told me things I had chosen not to see, how she talked about you when I wasn't around, how she made sure the family invitations arrived late, how she actively, he swallowed hard, how she actively kept you away from the children because she didn't want you to have an influence on them. That hurt more than expected. I had suspected, of course, but hearing it confirmed was different. The children asked about you, Daniel continued, his voice trembling, especially at Jake. Asked, "When is Grandma coming?" And Tiffany always had an excuse, that you were busy, that you were sick, that you had other plans. And his face contorted in pain. I was there, I heard the lies and said nothing. Why? I asked, although I already knew the answer, because it was easier. The tears finally fell down his cheeks, because confronting Tiffany meant admitting I had married someone capable of that cruelty. It meant admitting I had failed you. And it was much easier to believe her version, where you were fine, where you didn't need us, where everything was justified. He slumped onto the nearest sofa, covering his face with his hands. I remained standing, my suitcase beside me, watching my son fall apart. "There's something else," he said, his voice muffled by his hands. "Something I never told you." I waited. He lowered his hands slowly, his eyes were red, swollen. When Dad died, before we started going through the documents, Tiffany told me something. She said that now I was the man of the family, that I had to take care of you because you wouldn't be able to do it alone. That widows your age become dependent, needy. The air seemed to leave my lungs, and I believed her. I went to those meetings with you expecting to find a lost, incapable woman, but you— A sad smile crossed his face. You knew exactly what to do. You had everything organized. You handled every piece of paper, every test, every decision with clarity. And that bothered her. It bothered her that we didn't need you and you. He paused for a long time. It made me feel ashamed. I realized I had underestimated my own mother, that I had believed that without Dad, you would crumble, and when you didn't, when you showed you were perfectly capable, I didn't know how to process that. He shook his head. So I let Tiffany create a new narrative, one where you were fine, but not so fine that you didn't need us, one where we could visit you when it suited us without feeling guilty. The silence between us was dense, heavy with years of unspoken truths. "Daniel," I said finally, my voice softer than I expected, "why are you telling me all this now? Because I need you to know that I know exactly what I did. I can't hide behind I didn't know or Tiffany manipulated me. I had chose every time I had ignored a call from you, every time I found an excuse not to visit you, every time I allowed Tiffany to treat you badly. I chose." He stood up, or picked them up, approaching me. "And I chose wrong. I chose my comfort over your well-being. I chose my marriage over my mother. And now," I asked, "now that you know I have money, now that you realize there's an inheritance at stake, it's not about that." His voice was firm despite the tears. "Last night, before Tiffany told me everything, before processing anything about the money, I looked at old photos. I found one of my college graduation. Dad was there, you were there. And I remembered that day. I remembered how proud you looked, how you hugged me and told me I had achieved something incredible." He wiped his tears with the back of his hand. "And then I looked at more recent photos. Jake's elementary graduation last year, Tiffany was there, her parents were there, my in-laws, but you weren't. And I realized we hadn't even invited you. We hadn't even thought about you. Daniel, I let my son grow up without knowing his grandmother. I let Tiffany turn my children into strangers to you. His voice became more desperate. And it wasn't because of the money I didn't know you had. It was because it was easier to keep you at a distance than to deal with the discomfort of including you. Part of me wanted to console him. The part of me that had been a mother for 37 years wanted to hug him and tell him everything would be okay. But another part, the part that had suffered in silence for 15 years, stood firm. I appreciate your honesty, I said calmly. I truly appreciate it, but Daniel, acknowledging your mistakes doesn't undo them. I know, he nodded frantically. I know, but it has to be a start. There has to be a way to fix this. Fix it for what? For whom? I looked at him directly. So you can feel better about your choices, so you can tell yourself you tried, so you can be part of your grandchildren's lives, so you can be my son again. I never stopped being your mother, Daniel. You stopped being my son. The words came out harsher than I intended, but they were true. I watched as they hit him, as his face contorted in pain. Then tell me what to do, he pleaded. Tell me how to fix 15 years of mistakes. Tell me how to get you back. You can't. The words were simple, final. There's no reset button for this, Daniel. There's no series of apologies or gestures that will bring back lost time. Then what? Do you just give up on me? Do you discard me like I discarded you? The accusation in his voice surprised me. I'm not discarding you. I'm freeing both of us. I don't want to be freed. I want my mother. Do you want her? I asked gently. Or do you want the idea of a mother, the woman who forgives everything, who is available when you need her, who disappears when you don't? Because that woman no longer exists. She died yesterday in that lobby when your wife humiliated me, and you laughed. I didn't laugh because it was funny. I laughed because I was nervous, because I didn't know what to do. You could have defended me. You could have stopped Tiffany before things went so far. You could have done 1,000 different things, but you chose to laugh. I picked up my suitcase, and that laugh told me everything I needed to know. Daniel blocked my path, desperate. Please, Mom, not like this. Don't end this like this. I'm not ending anything. You ended this years ago. I'm just officially acknowledging it. The children need you. The children have parents. They have grandparents on Tiffany's side. They'll be fine. And his voice completely broke. I'll be fine. I looked at him, this man who had been my baby, my little boy, my son. I saw the genuine pain in his eyes. I saw the regret, but I also saw years of damage that couldn't be erased with tears. I don't know, Daniel, I said honestly, but that's no longer my responsibility. I moved to walk past him, but his voice stopped me one last time. Is there anything I can do? Anything? I turned halfway. Yes, be better. Not with me. It's too late for that. But be better with your children. Teach them that people aren't disposable, that family isn't just a word. And when they grow up and ask about their grandmother, tell them the truth. Tell them they had her, but you lost her. This time when I walked toward the exit, he didn't stop me. The cab was waiting. The driver took my suitcase and put it in the trunk. Before getting in, I looked back one last time. Daniel was still in the lobby, motionless, watching me leave. I had imagined this moment in so many different ways. I thought I would feel triumph, vindication, even joy, but I only felt a void. Not for what I was leaving behind, but for what I never truly had. I got into the cab. To the airport, please. As we drove away from the resort, I didn't look back again. There was no reason to. That chapter of my life was over. 6 months later, I woke up in my new home to the sound of gulls and the smell of salt in the air. The house I had bought on the Northern California coast was modest compared to what I could afford, but it was perfect. 2 bedrooms, an open kitchen with an ocean view, a small garden where I had planted herbs and wildflowers. It was mine, completely mine. I made coffee and went out onto the terrace with a blanket over my shoulders. The sunrise painted the sky in oranges and pinks, and the waves broke gently against the rocks below. This morning ritual had become sacred to me. It was the moment where I simply existed, without expectations, without disappointments, without the pressure of being who others needed me to be. The first few months after leaving the resort had been strange. Daniel called me 17 times the first week. I let all of them go to voicemail. I listened to every message, not because I wanted to answer, but because I needed to confirm my decision. Every call was the same. Apologies, pleas, promises of change. But the words no longer meant anything. The words had never been the problem. Eventually, the calls decreased, once a week, then once every 2 weeks. Now, I occasionally saw his number appear, but I no longer felt the urgency to answer. I had made peace with my decision. The sale of my stake in the resort had been completed last month. Robert had kept me informed throughout the process. I asked him not to reveal my new address to anyone, and he respected my privacy. The money from the sale, nearly $3 million, was divided according to my instructions. 2/3 went into a trust fund for my grandchildren, accessible when they turned 25. The remaining third I donated to organizations supporting older women in situations of family abuse. It was ironic, but also appropriate. My phone vibrated on the table next to my coffee. A text message from an unknown number. I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. Rose, it's Margaret, Tiffany's mother. I need to talk to you. It's important, please. Margaret. I hadn't spoken to her since Daniel and Tiffany's wedding almost 16 years ago. I hesitated for several minutes before replying. About what? The answer came quickly. About my daughter, about what she did to you. Please give me 5 minutes of your time. I should have said no. I should have blocked the number and continued with my peaceful morning. But something in her message, a desperation I recognized in myself, made me reply. Call me. The phone rang seconds later. Rose, thank you for answering. Margaret's voice sounded tired, older than I remembered. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what Tiffany did. No, you don't, I said simply. I know, but I need you to know something. I need you to know that Tiffany, she learned that behavior from me. She paused, and I heard her shaky breath. I was a terrible mother-in-law, controlling, critical, always meddling in my son's marriage. And when they finally got fed up with me, when they pushed me out of their lives, I was filled with bitterness. I said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Tiffany saw all that. She saw how my meddling destroyed my relationship with my son. And when she married Daniel, she swore she would never allow her mother-in-law to do the same, except, her voice cracked, except you were never like me. You never interfered, and yet she treated you as if you had. Why are you telling me this, Margaret? Because 2 weeks ago, Tiffany came to see me. It was the first time we had spoken in months, and she told me something that broke my heart. She said, I became you, Mom. I did exactly what I swore I'd never do. I became you. I closed my eyes, feeling a sadness I hadn't expected. Not for Tiffany, but for the cycle, for how damage repeats itself generation after generation. Margaret, I appreciate you calling, but this doesn't change anything. I know. Her voice was barely a whisper. I'm not calling to ask you to forgive Tiffany. I'm calling because I need someone to know that I'm sorry. I planted the seeds of her behavior, and you paid the price. Not just me, I said softly. Daniel, too, the children, too, and Tiffany herself. Yes. There was a long silence. Is there anything I can do? I sighed before answering. Break the cycle with your other grandchildren. If Tiffany lets you get close to them, be different. Be the grandmother I never got to be. I heard a sob on the other end of the line. I will. I promise you. We hung up shortly after. I stayed sitting on my terrace, looking at the ocean, processing the conversation. Margaret was right about one thing. Tiffany had learned her behavior, but she had also chosen to repeat it. And that choice, that was entirely hers. 2 weeks later, I received a package in the mail. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the address. It was from Daniel. Inside was a small box and a letter. I opened the letter first, my hands trembling slightly. Mom, I don't expect you to answer this. I don't expect you to read past the first line, but I need you to know a few things. Tiffany and I are divorcing, not because of you, although I know you were the catalyst for me to finally see the truth. We're divorcing because we build a marriage on lies and manipulation, and neither of us can keep living like that. The children are confused. Jake asks about you constantly. Lillian is too young to understand, but she feels the absence. I've been telling them about you. Not the version Tiffany created, but the truth. I tell them about how you cared for me when I was a child, how you sacrificed so much for Dad and me, how you were strong when the world expected you to crumble. And I've told them how I failed you. The box contained something of Dad's. I found it among his things when I finally forced myself to go through the boxes in the attic. It's a journal he kept. In it, he talks a lot about you, about how much he admired you, about how you were his favorite person in the world. There's one entry in particular that's marked. It's from the day he died. He wrote it that morning before his heart attack. It says, "If anything happens to me, I know Rose will be fine. She is the strongest person I know, but I hope Daniel sees it too. I hope he takes care of her in the way she deserves, not the way he thinks she needs." I read it and cried for 3 days straight because Dad knew you, he saw you, and I never did. I'm not sending this to get your forgiveness. I'm sending it because you deserve to know that Dad loved you exactly as you were, and that I eventually learned to see what he always saw. Be happy, Mom. Be everything you never could be when you were trying to be a part of our family. With love and eternal regret, Daniel. I held the letter with trembling hands. Silent tears rolled down my cheeks as I opened the box. Inside was Richard's worn leather journal with page markers sticking out. I opened it to the page Daniel had pointed out. Richard's handwriting, familiar and longed for, filled the page. I read his words about me, about our life together, about his faith in my strength. And at the end, that line about Daniel, that hope that was never fulfilled. I closed the journal and held it against my chest, looking out at the ocean. Richard had known me, he had truly seen me, and in a way, that had to be enough. I put the journal on my nightstand, where I could see it every morning, but I didn't reply to Daniel's letter, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. He had gone through his process, he had reached his conclusions, and I was at peace with mine. The months continued to pass. Winter arrived, bringing storms that made the ocean roar. Spring followed, with wildflowers covering the cliffs, and slowly I built a life that was entirely my own. I met other women in town, widows, divorcees, some who never married. We formed a group that met on Thursdays for dinner and to share stories. They weren't my blood family, but they felt more like family than the people I shared DNA with. One summer afternoon, I was in the garden when my phone rang. It was a local number I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mrs. Whitmore. This is Jennifer from the Harbor Cafe. You have a visitor asking for you. He says he's your grandson." My heart stopped. My grandson. Yes, a young boy, 9 or 10 years old. He's with his father. They're asking if you can meet them here. Jake and Daniel. Part of me wanted to say no. I wanted to protect the peace I'd built. But another part, a smaller but persistent part, felt curious. Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. I changed into more presentable clothes, brushed my hair, and took a deep breath. The cafe was only a 10-minute walk from my house, but I took a longer route, needing time to prepare myself. When I arrived, I saw them immediately. Daniel was at a table by the window, looking thin and tired. Next to him was Jake, clearly 10 years old now, with his father's dark hair and my eyes. Jake saw me first. He stood up immediately but didn't run toward me. Instead, he waited as if unsure of his reception. I approached slowly. Daniel stood up too, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Hello, Mom," he said softly. "Daniel." I nodded, then I looked at Jake. "Hello, Jake." "Hi, Grandma." His voice was timid, uncertain. We sat down. A waitress came over and took orders for coffee for Daniel and me, hot chocolate for Jake. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "Dad says we haven't seen you for a long time because he made mistakes." I looked at Daniel. He nodded slightly, encouraging me to answer. "Yes," I said carefully. "That's true. And he says you didn't want to see us because we hurt you. That's also true." Jake looked at his hot chocolate. I'm sorry I didn't know you better." My chest tightened. "Jake, honey, none of this was your fault. None of it. Dad says you own hotels and that you're very smart. I was a part owner of a resort. Not anymore." "Why not?" And I looked at Daniel, then back at Jake. "Because I needed a new start." Jake nodded as if he understood, although he probably didn't. He drank his hot chocolate in silence. Daniel finally spoke. "I didn't come to ask you for anything, Mom. I came because Jake deserves to know his grandmother, and because—" He stopped, choosing his words carefully. "Because I wanted you to see that I'm trying to be better, trying to teach Jake what I didn't learn until it was too late." "How did you find me?" "Robert, I pleaded with him. I told him it wasn't for me, but for Jake. He eventually gave me the town name. The rest was easy. It's a small town. I should have been angry at Robert for revealing my location, but I wasn't. What do you want, Daniel? Nothing. His voice was firm. I don't want your forgiveness. I don't want your money. I just want Jake to have the chance to know you if you're willing. It doesn't have to be much, once a month or every 2 months, whatever you can give. I looked at Jake. The boy watched me with cautious hope in his eyes. It wasn't his fault. It never had been. Jake, I said softly, would you like to come to my house sometime? I live near the ocean. You could come and we could walk on the beach. His face lit up. Really? I looked at Daniel. Once a month. You bring him and pick him up. You don't come into my house. We don't have family conversations. You just bring Jake. Daniel nodded with shining eyes. Thank you, Mom. Don't do it for you, I said firmly. I'm doing it for him. And it was true. Jake deserved to know his grandmother. He deserved to have that connection, and I deserved the opportunity to be a grandmother on my own terms. The visits began the following month. Daniel would bring Jake and leave him for 3 hours. Sometimes we walked on the beach collecting shells. Other times we baked cookies in my small kitchen. Slowly, Jake started to open up, talking about school, his friends, his fears, about his parents' divorce. He didn't talk about Tiffany, and I didn't ask. It wasn't my place. Daniel kept his word. He would drop Jake off and return exactly at the agreed-upon time. He didn't try to come in. He didn't seek deep conversations. Sometimes I saw him waiting in his car and wondered what he was thinking, but it wasn't my concern. 6 months after that first visit, Jake and I were sitting on my terrace eating sandwiches when he said, Dad says you're the strongest person he knows. Oh, really? Yes, he says you were strong even when no one noticed. He says that's what being strong really means. I felt a lump in my throat. Your dad is wiser than he used to be. He says he wishes he had been that way sooner. Jake looked at me with serious eyes. He says he lost you because of his own fault and that it's the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't know what to say to that. Jake continued, but he also says the best thing he can do now is make sure I don't make the same mistakes, that I learn to value people while they are still here. I looked out at the ocean, blinking back tears. Your dad is right about that. That night, after Daniel picked up Jake, I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine. My phone was on the table next to me, and for the first time in almost a year, I considered calling Daniel, not to forgive him, not to rebuild what had been broken, but to tell him I saw him trying, that I saw his efforts, even if they didn't change the past. But instead, I sent a simple text message. Jake is a good kid. You're raising him well. The reply came minutes later. Thank you, Mom. That means more than you know. I didn't respond. There was no need. Months turned into a year. Jake kept coming, and slowly we built our own relationship. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, it was honest, and it was on my terms. Daniel never asked for more than I was willing to give. Lily, his youngest daughter, was now 7 years old, and she sometimes came with Jake. She was shyer, more cautious, but also sweet. I would tell them stories about their grandfather, Richard. I would teach them to cook recipes he loved. I would show them photos of when Daniel was a boy. We weren't a traditional family, but we were sharing something. And that something was enough. One autumn afternoon, 2 years after leaving the resort, I was in my garden planting tulip bulbs when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I looked up, expecting to see one of my friends from town. It was Daniel, alone. I stood up slowly, taking off my gardening gloves. It's not visiting day. I know. He stopped several feet away, respecting the space. I needed to tell you something. I waited without inviting him closer. Tiffany got remarried to someone she met in therapy. He let out a bitter laugh. Ironic, right? But I didn't come to talk about her. I came because... He took a deep breath. Because I finally understood something. I understood that I don't need your forgiveness to move on. That my job isn't to get you to forgive me, but to make sure Jake and Lily never have to ask for forgiveness for the same things. And? I asked, my voice neutral. And I came to say thank you for allowing Jake and Lily to know you, for giving them what I wasted. And to tell you, his voice cracked slightly, to tell you that I finally understand what it means to be strong. It means knowing when to walk away. It means setting boundaries even when it hurts. It means choosing yourself when no one else does. The ocean wind blew between us, carrying the scent of salt and autumnal flowers. I lost you a long time ago, he continued, and I spent years not accepting it, but now I do. You are not my mother in the way you used to be. You are Jake and Lily's grandmother, and that is more than I deserve. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Daniel nodded as if he had expected my silence. I won't show up unannounced again, I promise. I just needed you to know that I finally understand. He turned to leave, but something in me, something small but persistent, made me speak. Daniel stopped, but didn't turn around. What you're teaching your children about respect, about boundaries, about not taking people for granted. I paused. Your father would be proud of that. I saw his shoulders tense, then tremble slightly. He nodded once quickly and kept walking without looking back. I stayed in my garden as the sun began to descend toward the horizon. I didn't feel triumph in my words. I didn't feel vindication. I only felt a kind of quiet closure. And Daniel would never be my son in the way he once was. That relationship died in the lobby of that resort. But he was learning to be a better father, and his children, my grandchildren, were learning lessons he learned too late. That night, I sat on my terrace with Richard's journal. I'd been reading it little by little, savoring each entry like a precious gift. I reached a page near the end, dated just a week before his death. Rose asked me today if I regretted anything. I told her no, but the truth is, I do regret one thing, not telling her more often how extraordinary she is. Not for what she does for me or Daniel, but for who she is. Strong when the world expects weakness, gentle when the world offers cruelty. She is my favorite person, and I hope that when I'm gone, she remembers that. I hope she finds happiness that doesn't depend on sacrificing herself for others. I closed the journal, silent tears rolling down my cheeks. Richard had known me, he had seen me completely, and he had wished for exactly what I finally had. Happiness on my own terms. I looked out at the ocean, dark under the night sky but illuminated by the moon. The waves continued to break with their eternal rhythm, indifferent to human drama, to broken families, to healed and wounded hearts. My phone vibrated. A message from Jake. Grandma, Dad says I can sleep over next month if you want. Do you want to? We can see the stars from your terrace. I smiled, typing my reply. I would love to, sweetie. Bring your sleeping bag. This was my life now, not the one I had imagined when I was young, not the one I had hoped for when Daniel was born, not the one I had endured for 15 years of exclusion and pain. It was something completely new, something built on affirmed boundaries and earned respect, something where I chose who entered my space and how, something where my peace was a priority. I had lost a family, but I had gained something more valuable. I had gained myself. Years of waiting to be seen, to be valued, to be loved for who I was instead of what I could give had ended. I no longer expected anything from anyone, and paradoxically, that had given me everything. The ocean roared softly in the distance. The stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky, and I, Rose Whitmore, sitting on my small terrace in my small house by the sea, was finally at peace. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no grandiose apologies that healed decades of pain, no perfect ending where everyone learned their lesson and lived happily ever after. But there was this, a woman who had finally learned that walking away wasn't abandonment. It was my survival. It was yet self-respect. It was yet love. The hardest kind of love of all, the self-love that says, I deserve better than this. There was this, grandchildren who would grow up knowing that people have limits and that those limits must be respected, who would learn that you can love someone from a distance, who would see in their grandmother not a victim, but a woman who chose her own peace over the comfort of others. And there was this, sis. I, finally free from the burden of expectations that would never be met, free from the need to be needed, free from apologizing for existing. Freedom, yeah, I discovered, doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in a house by the sea, on a terrace under the stars. It arrives when you finally let go of what was never yours to hold, the responsibility for the happiness of others at the expense of your own. I took the last sip of my wine and looked toward the future. I didn't know what would come. Maybe Jake and Lily would continue to visit. Maybe the relationship with Daniel would remain distant, but respectful. Maybe someday, years in the future, we could find something akin to forgiveness. Or maybe not. And that was okay too, because I had learned the most important lesson of all. I didn't need their closure to have peace. I didn't need their repentance to move on. I didn't need anything from them at all. All I needed was this, the sound of the ocean, the sky full of stars, and the absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I had chosen myself, and that choice, that simple but revolutionary choice, had changed everything. The night deepened, and I stayed seated a little longer, savoring the stillness, the solitude that no longer felt like abandonment, but like a sanctuary. And finally, when the ocean chill became too much, I went inside my house. I locked the door behind me, not to keep something out, but to keep something in. My peace, my space, my life rebuilt from scratch. And for the first time in more years than I could count, I went to sleep without a weight on my chest, without questions, without answers, without hopes that would hurt me, only with the deep, silent satisfaction of a woman who had finally found her way home, to her true home, to herself. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge, but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace, or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.